To Theories of Reality. I'm Professor Borrowdale, and this is our first class. And I think I'm going to do something a little different today, which is to skip spending a long time going over the syllabus. You're all adults, you should be able to read it. It's online in Moodle, and you can find the Moodle link on the main campus website. I sent an announcement that you should have received in your email about the first week. Lots of important information there. Make sure to read that, to go and read the syllabus. And the one thing I'll mention is that has to be done right away is to confirm your enrollment in the class to avoid being administratively dropped. You should take the syllabus quiz by Thursday at 3, which is right after class on Thursday, and that's when I'll be looking at my enrollments, and I've got a list of students I want to add. So if you're thinking about another class, you decide to drop, please make those decisions as soon as you can. All right, so this is this class almost went out of existence in last year's round of budget cuts. They're originally going to just say, well, we'll just have ethics and critical thinking because, by God, it's in our college mission statement. It would look really bad if we say we're committed to studying ethical issues and teaching students to think critically, and we got rid of the critical thinking class and the ethics class. So, so then they finally decided, well, I guess, okay, we'll give you one more class. And so this is the class I picked as sort of closest to maybe like an intro class. So, and I think it's the metaphysics is kind of foundational to the other. I think it's the broadest and most foundational of the course we have here. We used to have a theories of knowledge course, which has some overlap with critical thinking. So this is another reason why I decided to go with the theories of reality. So this course used to be called metaphysics, and then we had a meeting when I first got here. And people were, other faculty members were complaining. They get students that would come in there and they were looking for the sort of material that you get, like say, by going to what's called a metaphysical bookstore. This tarot cards and past life regression, channeling the entities and stuff like that. So, and the other class was theory of knowledge. So we decided to go with theories of knowledge, theories of reality. But this is, in academic philosophy, it's called metaphysics. And this comes from Aristotle, who wrote a book called The Physics, which is about nature and the physical world. And then he has this other book, After Physics, so the metaphysics. So we'll just to go over the topics in this class, let me just put something here. What we'll be talking about, and this is all in the course description, of course. I just think I'll call up our Moodle page here. If you're on the main page, you go down to the how do they always move this thing around? Every time they redesign this page, I get irritated. YouTube, WordPress, Facebook, Twitter.
It's on the left-hand side under the apply today.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Thank you. It used to be down in the lower right, and I put all our social media stuff there. All right. Okay. Let's look at our course outline here. So we'll be talking about the reality and truth. Sort of what is it we're studying? What is reality? Is reality a determinate thing, or is it what we perceive? What does it mean to say that something's true? And then what's philosophy all about? We'll go on and talk about the mind and body and whether they're different aspects of the same substance or whether they're different substances, whether you have a soul, whether it's an immaterial substance or whether your mind is just a function of your brain, which is part of the physical world. Or there's another view, which is that mind and body are both aspects of an immaterial world, and that everything is made of spirit or mind, and that the physical world is an illusion. Then we'll move on to talking about personal identity, which is the question of what makes you you, what makes you what a person is, and then what makes a person the same person over time. So what makes Borrowdale as like a 5-year-old. When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a daredevil, like Evel Knievel was my idol. He was a motorcycle stunt rider who broke every bone in his body and famously jumped the fountain in Caesar's palace and had a huge crack up that they would show in the wild world of sports every once in a while. I think it's at the beginning they show that crack up. And I thought it was really cool to be a daredevil, right? And I had a little Evel Knievel action figure with a little motorcycle, and I begged my parents to ride my tricycle down the slide in the backyard, and I had a crack up like Evel Knievel at Caesar's palace. So there's like so as 5 years old, I wanted to be a daredevil. I loved the thrill of victory, and sometimes there was the agony of defeat. And now it's like I think about doing like something dangerous, like paragliding or put on one of those squirrel suits and shooting down towards a mountain or something. I'm like, that's not for me. I care about my life. I don't want to die. And I'm somewhat risk averse now. So a totally different personality, right? So I'm a thrill-seeking kid, outgoing, and now I'm a little more, risk-averse today. So who's the real me? And so people change over time. Obviously when I was 5 years old, I believed in Santa Claus to my everlasting shame. I had all kinds of beliefs about like adults. I thought my parents were. I think I had an idealized view of my parents. There's a lot of things I didn't know and didn't understand, and so all those things change, and so people change and evolve over time. So the question is, what makes you the same person over time? What is it that follows you through your whole life that makes you you? Is it your physical body? Is it your mind? Is it your memories and experiences? Is it your personality, or some combination of those things? So we'll be talking about that. And it's you get into these paradoxes. Is there a thing that follows you throughout your life? And the Buddhists will say, well, no. You think about yourself. You're sort of like a process, and there's no like substance, right? It's like a candle flame. It's one of the analogies that's used. It's a flame isn't really a thing. It's the process of combustion, and it doesn't have any identity. If you take one candle and light another candle with it and blow out the first candle, is it the same flame? Well, in a way, yes. In a way, no. Right? You're transferring the process from one candle to another candle, but there's no thing called the flame. So that's kind of an anti-realist view. And then we'll talk about some of the views that there are such things as persons, and that there are things that follow you throughout your life, and this is what makes you the same person. Then we'll talk about life after death, arguments pro and con. We'll talk about cryonics, which is kind of the materialist life after death, this idea of freezing your body for later reanimation in the future. And we'll also be talking about near-death experiences as evidence that there is an afterlife, that you have a soul, and that when you die, it goes to this other place. And so in near-death experiences, people actually, they're clinically dead. They're under full cardiac arrest. Usually typically you get brain damage after about 5 minutes of your brain not having oxygen. But there's some cases now where they do this thing called low temperature medicine. So they stop your heart, drain all the blood out of your body, and replace it with this sort of substitute. And and you're chilled down to just above freezing, maybe like 40 degrees, and then they operate on you. And they do this because it's kind of like if you try to operate on, if you try to fix your car while it's running, it's really difficult, right? You gotta watch for the flywheel, and you know, things are moving, there's oil pressure, right? And so if you're gonna try to fix like, you know, like something about, like you're trying to replace the head gasket on your car, right? You can't do that while the thing's running. So similarly, if you're doing heart surgery, or if you're trying to fix an aneurysm, which is a blocked vessel in your brain, it's really hard to do that when a person's alive. So what they do is they kill the person, drain the blood out of their body, operate them, and bring them back. So you have people who've been clinically dead for 45 minutes. And some of these people, they have experiences of, you know, going to another place. They feel themselves snap out of their bodies and look down at their corpse. And then you know, a big tunnel opens, and they feel themselves being drawn into the tunnel, and they end up in this other place with beams of light and all sorts of supernatural experiences. And so the question is what to make of these experiences. Are they just hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation and the body sort of shutting down in the last throes of death, or are these experiences veridical? That is, are they representative of reality? We'll talk about reincarnation, and there's people that anecdotal cases of people that report information from past lives that it seems that it would be difficult to explain how they could have known those things. This is a big belief. This is a belief actually by the ancient Greeks. Socrates and Plato seem to believe in reincarnation. And this is a belief in some of the big world religions like Buddhism and Hinduism. Free will. That's a big one, I think super important one. Do you have control over your life? Are you a victim of social forces and heredity and psychological mechanisms? Is it just stimulus response? Is it unconscious drives and social conditioning that determines your behavior? Or do you have free will such that you can determine the course of your life, make everyday decisions, in circumstances which may influence you but never determine your actions? Or are your actions determined by these things, or maybe by the fact that we live in a material world of cause and effect that has determinate results, and so if you're a material being, maybe you're subject to the same inevitable laws of cause and effect. Then we'll move on to arguments for the existence of God, and that'll be a big section near the end. We'll talk about the various traditional philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and the major argument against the existence of God, which is the problem of evil. And that, briefly stated, is that if you think about God as a being who's omnipotent, that is, he can do anything, he has all power, and you think about God as also being good, then the question arises, like, why is there evil in the world? Because it seems that if God is all-powerful, he'd be able to prevent evil. If God is good, then it'd seem like he'd want to prevent evil. But yet you look around the world around you, and you see all kinds of terrible things happen every day, and you wonder if we have a loving Heavenly Father, why these things occur. And you think an analogy with, say, a parent. If God's our loving Heavenly Father, it seems that he's a neglectful parent, and perhaps even an abusive one, when you look at the extent of particularly human suffering around the world that we see every day. And then finally, this last section, we'll be talking about the meaning of life. So the question is, does life have a meaning or a purpose, and what might that be? And we'll be looking at two authors, Leo Tolstoy, and Bertrand Russell, who have different conceptions. And basically, one of them has to do with is kind of a religious justification for it, supernatural, the idea of a supernatural order, and that God gives meaning and purpose to our lives. And Bertrand Russell gives a more humanistic, maybe even existential explanation for the meaning of life. So those are the major topics we'll be discussing. Anybody have any questions about those in particular? All right, well, these things will come up. So make sure to read the syllabus, make sure to take the syllabus quiz by Thursday at 3. And I'd actually like to jump right in and talk about this handout in Moodle, What is Truth? And then in the second hour, we're going to talk about Socrates and the origin of philosophy, and we'll be going through the Apology. So this week, we're going through chapter 1. So make sure to, for next time, read chapter 1. It's not very long. So I give you Socrates' Apology, which is his defense before the city-state of Athens, on trial for several charges. The major charge seems to be corrupting the youth. And philosophers ever since Socrates have been corrupting the youth in various ways. And perhaps I'll even be able to corrupt you a little bit. So that's for. And we'll talk about that a little bit today, but make sure to read that for next week. And then at the end of the chapter, there's a little discussion about the different branches of philosophy and what they're about. All right, let's get this. I have this handout in week 1. What is truth? And so make sure to read this for next time too. And maybe I don't want to have that up there yet. I don't want to. Before our discussion, I want to give anything away. If you've read it, feel free to suggest things from the reading if you've read that already. But I'm not assuming that anybody's read anything today because it's the first day and people are still trying to find their bearings. Let me let's see if I can put this as a student view. I go back and forth with the new Moodle. I'm not actually sure I use this. I'm going to go to my whiteboard. All right. So these videos will be posted to YouTube later in the day, and also they will. We're live streaming on the internet as well. Let's see. I want black. Let's see anything. I don't know if there are any other announcements. So that's basically the course. I'll just say by way of like the requirements. There's just 2 midterms and a final. They're objective, multiple choice, true, false. Take them in the testing lab, and here on the main campus or with approved proctor or out in one of our satellite campuses, and pretty objective testing based on what we do in class here and the readings. And I was going to say this digital whiteboard also gets posted along with the videos. So 2 questions. What is truth? And then we'll get to what is reality. These are intertwining questions. This is why it's hard to do. It's hard to do metaphysics, and maybe this is what's called epistemology. Oh, let's try that again. Maybe I'm going to do this. So what is truth? And this is really a question of epistemology, which is sometimes called theories of knowledge or theory of knowledge. A little rusty on writing on my board here. Especially if you're going to put technical words up, you want to make sure it's legible. Also called theory of knowledge. Knowledge is related in some ways to truth, right? So it's theories of knowledge. And then there's this further question, what is reality, which we'll be dealing with in this class. And so and this is metaphysics. And these are interrelated questions, and you can't really talk about, like, it's hard to talk about truth without reality or reality without truth. They seem to be interrelated, and it's hard to talk about, what can we know and how do we know it without talking about, well, what is the world like and what is this world we're trying to know? So you think about that. This to start out with the concept of truth. And then we'll move into, if we can get a handle on truth. It seems like maybe that's a more foundational concept, that the truth. People talk about what's the truth about reality? What is it to know reality? It's to know the truth about reality. So what is truth, though? What do you think about when the word truth comes? What comes to mind when you think about the concept of truth?
Something that can be proven in reality.
Okay, so let's see. Let's just do this. What can be proven? All right. So can you, when you prove something, what are you doing? Are you? I suppose this other question is, can I know something? Can something be true without being able to prove it? I suppose that might be one question, right? So if you give a definition of truth as that which can be proven, then the question is, could something be true and still not be amenable to proof, or can't be proved now? Yeah.
I think in some cases truth can be subjective depending on what you're talking about as well. What's true to me might be different to what's true to someone else.
All right, subjective or relative. So like, can you think of a particular example?
Well, I mean, one example is religion. For some people, the existence of God is true. They believe it entirely, but to others, it's, well, no. So.
Yeah, and so that people have different beliefs. Are you saying that maybe truth and belief are kind of the same thing?
They're related. I mean, I wouldn't call them the same thing.
So let's say, okay, pick some people. Let's see. Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in God. The Pope does. So they have different beliefs. Are both of their beliefs true? Or does it have to be that one of those beliefs is true, the other one's false? Either the Pope's right or Richard Dawkins is right. And somebody else could answer if you want. All right, so one person believes in God, the other one doesn't. So is there a belief that's true? So would you say, well, their beliefs are each true for them? Or would you say, no, there's a belief that's true and one of them's right and one of them's wrong? Even if we can't tell, which maybe gets back to this, right? Maybe it might drive a wedge between this concept of truth and this concept of what can be proven, which might have more to do with knowledge. So would you say, like, that for belief in God, that whatever a person believes is true for them? True for him or her? No. No, you would say no, okay. Oh, why not? Like, what's the...
Because you're using the word belief. You're needing faith to be able to understand that it's true. Faith is the intermediate in between whether it's true or not. If you have no faith, it's not true to you. If you do have faith, it's true to you. If you have no faith, it's not true to you. So faith is kind of what dictates whether it's true or not, but you can't prove faith. Faith is just something that you have.
I think belief lacks physical evidence towards a conviction.
I was going to believe here is sort of related, maybe. I'll just put a question mark there. How things seem to you. There's this sort of idea that to say something's true for you, just to say, well, you believe it, right? What is it when a person says, "Oh, that's true for you"? Aren't you already say, "Well, that's your belief," right? Are you saying anything else? Then that's what you believe. The faith thing. Could you have faith in something that's false? That's a good question.
Yes.
Like, Can you think of an example?
Flat Earth theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
There
you
you go.
have enough people, would you have, is that faith?
It's belief.
Yeah, people.
It's a belief, right? You can have a belief that's false, right? So then there's this question, if you have a belief that's false, then it makes it sound like it's not subjective, though. Like what is, if you buy into the sort of subjective concept of truth, what does it mean to have a false belief?
Something that doesn't correspond to physical reality?
But corresponds with physical reality makes it seem like, let's say, correspondence. And maybe I'll just drop off the physical because it might be begging the question. This is a long word. I hyphenated at the end, I think. E-N-C-E, A-N-C-A. E-N-C-A. Corresponds with reality.
If I drop this water bottle, it'll fall to the ground. That's truth. So
Yeah.
I mean, that corresponds in reality.
But then, it seems like it can't be both these, right?
What
If it,
about the loose
But
setting?
are-
I know that loose setting and the bottle suspended in the
Yeah.
Is it true that the bottle didn't fall?
that's a good question.
Because then what is reality?
Our knowledge of reality varies as well because a very long time ago, everyone believed the Earth was flat. To them, that was true. But as we became more technologically advanced, that changes. I mean, we used to think that the Earth went around, or the sun went around the Earth. You know, as your knowledge of things change, that changes what you consider to be true.
So your belief. So now you start out by saying it was true to them, but then you switch to what you consider to be true. The question is there a difference between those two things? Let me get to him.
You have to have faith in the science that we have today that it's accurate because it can possibly change later on when we discover new information. So that means faith is in both proof as well as a belief. You have to have both in that concept. And so truth is very much tilted on what you can prove, but if you can't prove it, then the truth can go either way. Because if you cannot prove it right or wrong, then aren't both of them true until the proof comes out?
Like sometimes you have to have faith in something that doesn't exist to solve something that does exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Truth seems to have a value relative to
Something is
It's
true
different for
until
you.
refuted.
Okay, you think it's just sort of it can be different from person to person, and you talked about like from society to society or age to age, but I'd say like, let's leave the faith question aside because I think it can be a thorny issue. But we just talk about belief. A belief is kind of an attitude you have towards a statement that you accept it as say valid. I don't want to beg any questions here. So the question is, think about people that believe the Earth was flat, and so let's assume like at one time, large swaths, maybe the majority of people believe the Earth was flat. Does that mean the Earth was was true? Or did it just mean that they considered it to be true? Or they believed it to be true?
It was true until it was refuted.
So is something true, like if I say, I don't know, Harvey Weinstein is a stellar human being who respects women, right? And suppose I said that like back in, I don't know, when Oprah was kissing him on the cheek in front of reporters, whatever. Back in the 90s, Harvey Weinstein's this big Hollywood mogul, and it turns out he's engaged in all sorts of abominable behavior behind the scenes with women, including his charges of not just like using his position to get women to sleep with them, but sexual assaults, mistreating prostitutes, just all sorts of horrible things. So if I said Harvey Weinstein is a stellar human being, would it be true back in, say, the 90s, but it's not true now? Or has it never been true? It's just that he pulled the wool over people's eyes, or people kept quiet because they wanted to make a movie with Harvey. Yeah.
For it to not be true, I mean, then he'd have to have been a corrupt human being since like he was born. Because at some point in time, he wasn't doing those things that we designate that he's like a bad human being. So stellar might not be the correct word, but he was still an upright human being until at some point in time in his life when he changed that truth about himself.
And when you
Well,
define
pretty
something-
early on. This is talk about like suppose I said that in the 90s. So like all this stuff been going on for decades, but nobody's, hasn't gotten out in the press.
But he wasn't doing that for his entire life. So it's
Well, but I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying, suppose I said in 2005, Harvey Weinstein is a great human being who respects women. Was that statement true? Or did I have a false belief?
Maybe it was just true in your mind.
Okay, what is, so true,
real
what is,
truth exists only in the mind.
so is there a difference between true in my mind and true in reality?
Probably.
Then why don't we just call true in my mind? How is true in my mind different from I believe it? I suppose that'd be the question. So I believe Harvey Weinstein is a stellar human being who respects women, and then and so what's the difference between that being true in my mind and just like I believe Harvey Weinstein is a stellar human being?
It still says the
you
same.
believe without enough evidence to make the belief? It's like an unfounded belief, a desire for a truth to be?
Beliefs can be conformed to different areas. They can change. Truths aren't supposed to change.
Well, I mean, in
You
one
don't
sense,
want
you
them
might say
to.
truths don't like that. If truth is corresponds with reality, and truth's changing all the time, but it's changing as reality changes, right? So,
So it's
Young Americans for Liberty used to meet in Building Room 224. Now they're meeting in Building 1, Room 212. I'll send this flyer around. By the way, I'm the faculty advisor. So it changed. Reality changed, right? So now then there's a new room number. If you went to room 224, nobody would be there, right? So reality changed. So the truth about when the club meets has changed because reality changed. But truth about truth doesn't change at any like one time. It's not like the truth about whether I'm holding this flyer in my hand doesn't change unless I put the flyer down. Then it changes. But if you index truth to time and just say, okay, this is such and such a time, certain things are true and certain things aren't, and it seems like it's based on reality. Now, my belief could be wrong, right? I could have a false belief and I could show up at the wrong room. But maybe I see an old flyer that somebody didn't take down and I go to the wrong room. Well, would you say that, my belief is true for me? Would I sit there at the room, expecting as I start talking to the air in an empty room, and if I believed I was in the meeting because I was like on LSD, would that be true for me? It seems like you'd say that I had a bunch of false beliefs because I'm like strung out on acid and I went to the wrong room. I don't know. My story's getting elaborate. Send that around if you would.
Is change upon it like an aspect of truth, or is truth always changing?
Send that around if you would.
Oh, you said.
yeah,
I
sorry.
thought you said spin it around.
No, sorry. So the things change. So our beliefs change over time, right? So assembly. This is what most of us do, and you probably might even be conscious of this. You change your belief when you get new information, new evidence. So evidence plays a role in how you determine what's true. But there's a difference between, it seems to me at least, that there's a difference between how you figure out what's true and what it means for something to be true. So we're talking about, like, what does it mean for something to be true? So is truth just merely the fact that I have a thought in my head or a belief in my head, or is there something more to it? In other words, is it just subjective? If I believe in God, then God exists to me. But isn't there a further question about whether there really is a God or not?
Yeah.
And then they ask this question, like, is there a fact about the world as to whether or not there's a God, regardless of whether I believe it or not? Maybe God's kind of difficult, right? Sticky. So people in the Middle Ages say they believe the Earth is flat, and maybe some crazy people on the internet, although I'm not really sure whether they're serious or not.
We get a lot of views.
So yeah, they do get a lot of views, right? So, but it seems that people believed a certain thing about the Earth being flat. But why would you say that belief was true? What does it mean to say their belief was true for them? Does it mean anything other than they believed it?
It was like a collective conscience.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of people believed it.
Everyone thought the same thing.
So in other words, to say like, okay, people believe the earth was flat, and you say, oh, their belief was true to them. Does that say anything more than they believed it? Right? If I ask why did they believe it? Oh, because they believed it? No, they probably had some evidence, right? It says, look around and the earth looks flat, right? Look on the horizon, looks flat. If the earth is actually, round, why doesn't stuff fall off the edge? So I mean, there's sort of like, you look at the horizon, you don't see the curvature of the earth. So that's maybe evidence of the senses. And really the only reason we know that the earth has a sort of ovoid, round and slightly ovoid shape to it is from scientific theories and then observations from space flight. So you could say, well, we can't really blame them for that, right? But why would you say it's true? I suppose would be the question. What motivates that? And is that an accurate usage of the word truth? Let me take another example, right? So you're in some third world culture, pre-scientific, tribal culture, and somebody in the tribe falls down the ground and begins convulsing. They sweat profusely, their eyes roll back in their head, they twitch all over, and finally become still. And one of the tribes member, and one of the tribes member comes over and he puts on a scary mask and grabs a rattle and starts chanting and shaking the rattle, and the person gets up. And maybe he started this process before when the person started twitching, right? And so the witch doctor comes over and puts on the scary mask, starts chanting, shaking the rattle. The person stops twitching, and they finally get up and they seem fine again. And they tell you, oh, well, he was possessed by an evil spirit, and the witch doctor drove the spirit out. You're like, oh, okay. So that's their belief. So they believe that, and suppose you're a medical student, right? And you say, well, it's temporal lobe epilepsy. I know what causes that. It's a problem in the corpus callosum. It's the communication of the two hemispheres of the brain, right? So you believe the person has epilepsy. They believe that it's caused, but that the person was possessed by an evil spirit. So now there's the question about whose belief is true. Are both your beliefs true? Would you say their beliefs are true for them, the people in the tribe that think it's an evil spirit?
Because their way doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah, I think maybe temporarily, right? Maybe there's some sort of, and I suppose
Morale-wise.
They
something,
have no
yeah.
basis of knowledge to understand that it's anything but an evil spirit. They were circumstantially raised to see that as a spiritual possession rather than a medical scenario.
Yeah, so you gotta blame them, right? Maybe they're not at fault for having that belief. Maybe if you were raised in that culture, maybe you'd have that belief too. But it doesn't mean their belief is true. Can you have a sincerely held but mistaken belief? Let me ask this question. Can you have a belief that you think is true, but which actually isn't true, that you can't sort of be blamed for?
I think so.
Santa Claus?
Yeah, you're Santa Claus as a child. I'd say, Gulf War I, weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein's plan was make everybody think I have stockpiles of nuclear and chemical weapons and they'll never invade my country. It turned out that was exactly the wrong thing to do. And he was playing this shell game where he was trying to make everybody think he had these big stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. And then and all the intelligence, not just the U.S., but all the other intelligence agencies thought that he had them. And so after 9/11, the U.S. government and the Bush administration said, well, 9/11 was awful, and that was just jet airplanes. What if Saddam hands some of his weapons off to terrorists? Let's go in there and take them out. It turned out to be a huge disaster, right? But this is part of Saddam's plan, was make everybody falsely believe I have stockpiles of nuclear and chemical weapons so that nobody will attack me, right? So I think the intelligence positions, the intelligence community all thought Saddam had these weapons. And you know, it's not like these guys are stupid, right? They gathered all this information, they looked at his behavior, they looked at the shell game he's playing with the weapons inspectors, and he's, you know, ordering yellow cake uranium, and so there all this stuff going on. And so, you know, when George Tenet tells President Bush it's a slam dunk that he's got these weapons, I think he really believed it. It turned out it was totally wrong. Saddam had a bunch of old junk and stockpiles of uranium, but he didn't really have any useful weapons. And even up to the point of the invasion, the units fighting for Saddam thought that they had chemical weapons. They just thought that the other units had them. So even Saddam's generals thought they had chemical weapons. So it turns out there's a great example of like a false belief that kind of blown up in your face, so to speak. Yeah.
But you said like truth happens when reality happens, right? So like if reality is happening, then it can prove them.
Yeah, or maybe truth that describes reality as it happens. So
Yeah. So I mean, a lie was still able to prove like a falsity in what was actually happening.
well,
I mean, like a lie was able to change reality as well.
yeah, I suppose it depends on like.
Whether it's true or not, it still changes reality.
Yeah, so Saddam was, you know, he was perpetrating a lie.
Yeah.
But if you think about it from the intelligence agency standpoint, they're making a judgment based on the evidence, and it turned out they were duped, right? You know, people are trying to trick you all the time. They're trying to trick you to buy things, trying to trick you to vote for people. Fraudsters and hucksters all around, right? But also people make honest mistakes about things, and people lack knowledge and they lack evidence. Sometimes people jump to conclusions, right? So there's lots of stuff that goes on where people end up with false beliefs. So here's a question: is on this sort of subjective this idea? Let's call this relativism. Let's call this view of truth relativism, which says that basically what you believe is true for you, that truth is subjective, and truth is equivalent with belief or perception, how things seem to you. And it's a subjective or relative to the individual. Although maybe also this question about whether it's relative to the individual or to culture, right? You might have a whole culture of people believing something. And the question is, if you're the odd man out and you have a different belief, then what's going on with that? Like, do you go with the majority belief or you just go with your own individual belief? But whichever it is, the relativist says truth is the equivalent of appearance or belief, how things seem to you. And this call this other one the correspondence theory. The correspondence theory of truth says that truth is that which corresponds with reality, or truth is the way things are, regardless of what anybody believes about them. And so think about like the planet Pluto, right? So the planet Pluto can't be observed with the naked eye. It's the ninth planet out. It got, to face the ignominy of being declassified as a planet. And then it got reclassified as like a dwarf planet. And but regardless of like the classification, there's this ball of ice and rock out there, in a regular orbit around the Earth. And it was there before anybody could see it, right? That was reality. So if you had a belief that there was a planet out there, I think it was discovered in the 20s, right? When you had good enough telescopes to see it. So, but Pluto has always existed, whether or not anybody knew about it. Pluto existed even before there were any human being. In the age of dinosaurs, Pluto existed, right? That's reality. So the correspondence theory would say that the statement Pluto exists has been true ever since the solar system was formed. And whereas the relativist theory would say, as soon as somebody saw Pluto through a telescope, it existed for them. That statement Pluto exists was true for them. But it might not be true for somebody like, say, from an Aboriginal culture, or it might be true to somebody that Pluto, that say, let's take the sun, right? So people used to think the sun is a god. Now we understand it's like a big ball of gas undergoing a hydrogen-helium reaction. So the question is one of those statements true and the other one false? Or are they just true to different people? What do you think?
One's true, one's false.
Pardon me?
One's true and one's false.
It seems like most people would say that, but I don't know. Maybe that would you say that to a primitive society that the sun is a god is true? And the question is, if you said it's true for them, do you mean anything other than they believe it? They falsely believe it, right? So you go through the relativist theory, and you end up with all these paradoxes, right? And it seems like people either they have the relativist theory, why would you use the word truth for belief, when it seems like you can believe things that can turn out to be false based on the evidence? Well, I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts about this? Like why would people be drawn to the relativist theory?
Because they won't find themselves in a false sense of reality.
Do you mean like the people are afraid of being wrong?
Like, sure, whatever they believe with that theory, they are right within themselves. They don't need an external influence to justify what they hold to be true in their lives.
They don't have to put effort into believing it. It works in their reality.
It gives them a sense of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of I'm always hesitant to sort of psychoanalyze people, but it comes up as a question, like, why would you be drawn to this theory? And I think there are parts of human nature where human beings tend to be, they don't like to be told they're wrong. They don't like to engage in the social faux pas of telling other people they're wrong, because that leads to social conflict. And so I want to say it's painful, and painful to be wrong, and telling others they're wrong creates conflict.
But there's some things that we can't prove and that we don't, I mean, going back to whether or not God exists, that's where relativism comes in handy, because there's no way, or we don't have a way right now to prove he exists or to prove he doesn't exist, and so
Wait till week
this
7.
works because it helps, solve some of the conflicts between the people who believe he exists and the people who believe he doesn't. It's a way of explaining how it's true for one group and the opposite is true for another group.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Let me just that's a good point. And people often say, well, for like ordinary things like how much money do I have in my bank account? I'll go with the correspondence theory there. But when it comes to religion, that makes it seem like, how could I say, isn't it dogmatic to say either God exists or God doesn't exist, or this religion's true and this other religion's false? It seems like there's something untoward about making those claims in the absence of determinate knowledge. Whereas I can check my bank account, or I can go in, I can walk in there and ask for a balance. I can go online and check my balance, right? So I can know how much money I can try to just write a bunch of checks and see what happens. So
relativism comes into play when science can't prove it.
Yeah.
So let me just I wanted to count like the last point. So one is
Sounds like relativism is speculation.
Yeah.
In the absence of
it takes
fact.
But yeah, I mean,
effort
basically.
to
Well, like just when tribes weren't able to know that the sun wasn't a god, they didn't have the sufficient evidence, they didn't have the technology to understand that it isn't a god. Relativism came over. But now we understand, well, it's not a god, and now that thinking goes away. But I mean, there are some very big questions out there that science can't prove yet at all. So I mean, but when will that happen? Then that's where it keeps going.
It's not a matter of time.
It's like reality is
It's
just
a
a
matter of time.
reality is just a back and forth between relativism and like truth.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I just want to make the second, there's a couple of points people made, which I think were good. The first is that it's kind of painful to be told you're wrong. That people don't like to be told they're wrong. People don't like to think that they made a mistake. And also there's something that raises conflict by telling other people you make a mistake and you sort of feel guilty about it. You feel like you're being intolerant, and the person might get angry because you don't like to be told you're wrong. And so how do you think the other guy feels, right? He feels exactly the same way. So that can be a thing. So maybe, and then it takes a lot of effort to try to justify your beliefs, right? To try to prove that they represent reality. Whereas if you're a relative, how do you know if something's true? Well, just peer inside your mind and see what's there. Okay, well, everything that's in there is true. No need to go out bothering yourself with evidence or investigation, read a bunch of books, talk to people, think, engage in philosophical argument. You just, whatever is in there is true for you. And then there's maybe this idea of an ethic of tolerance. Tolerance is a good thing. It's good to accept, allow other people their beliefs, to try to understand where someone else is coming from. And it seems like it's a positive thing, but you don't necessarily have to believe what say someone else's beliefs are true to be tolerant of them. You can say, well, you're entitled to be wrong. And that's a very interesting belief, but I don't happen to share it. So you don't necessarily have to do that. So it seems like people are confusing, this idea that everybody's belief is true with just having an ethic of tolerance.
It's a limited tolerance.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question about the extent of tolerance, I suppose. But but it seems like tolerance often motivates us. This is why you get like multiculturalism, right? So this idea that all cultures are equal, and it's wrong for you to judge any other culture for its beliefs. And then you get this last, and no culture is better than any other culture. Well, it seems like you can do a survey of all the cultures around the world, and you can see some cultures that are just totally screwed up, where people are treated terribly, where women are subjugated, where there's like a highly stratified class structure. They're very tribal. They're full of conflict, and people don't have rights, and they're living in squalor, right? And you see other societies where people enjoy broad freedoms to live pretty much as they please, and live in prosperity and peace. You think, well, that seems like a better way of doing things. So that might be problematic. But why would anybody say that then? Why would someone, without even looking, doing any investigation as far as anthropology, sociology, economics, just make a blanket statement, all cultures are equal? Well, it's because they want to be tolerant. They don't want to judge anybody, right? So that's part of it. And then this fourth thing, which is that...
It sounds like tolerance is bad, though.
Yeah. To an extent it is, yeah.
It's you have your friend has a particular religion religious conviction you have to happen to hold, right? And you'd say, well, they're entitled to their beliefs, even though I think that they seem like superstitious nonsense to me, but who am I to judge, right? I'm sure it works for them, or whatever people say. So it's
dictating that level is what can cause problems and not cause problems.
Then this fourth thing, and this is your point, which is about what do you do when there's no evidence, right? So relativism. Actually, let me change this. Actually, we're going to go into our break. We're a bit late for our break. We typically take a break. Skepticism. You guys are so enthusiastic here. I'm trying to get down on the points. So we usually take a break about 10 minutes till, and now it's about 5 minutes till. So let's talk about this question about If you can't figure out what's true, if there's no evidence either way, does that mean things are relative? Or does that mean you should withhold judgment and that we just don't know? So we'll take that up after the break. So let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back about 5 after by that clock. Ready when you are. There we are. All right, so it seems that you think about like things being true and false. In your everyday life, you don't think, oh, well, how much money do I have? Do I have enough to cover this transaction? You don't think like, oh, well, whatever I believe is true for me. And if you have a belief that it's odd, that you don't act as if it's true for you. Like if you're wondering whether you can pay for something, whether your boyfriend or girlfriend, if you're in a monogamous relationship, whether they're faithful to you, right? You know, suppose somebody shows you pictures of them with some other person, getting kissy face at a restaurant or something like that. You find the telltale hotel receipts and you don't think, oh well, whatever I believe is true for me. You think, oh well, this is evidence that maybe there's a problem here, right? So, and it seems like what a rational person does is when they get new evidence, they change their belief in accordance with the evidence, right? So this happens all the time. I find out I'm wrong about something. Sometimes it's a little thing, sometimes it's a big thing. I'm like, oops, I made a mistake. You don't say, oh, what I believe is true for me, no matter what. And so that, although human nature, people like to do that. And in particular, they like to do things that are complicated and where the evidence is sort of ambiguous. And this gets to your question about God. So does it make sense to jump to the relativist position when the evidence is ambiguous? So let's suppose there's, it's not clear whether there's a God or whether there isn't a God. There may be arguments, pro and con, hard to figure it out. Would the conclusion be that God exists is true for some people but not true for other people? Or would you just say that people have different beliefs about whether God exists, and the evidence isn't definitive on either side. And that's the sort of skeptical thing where it seems like relativism says that whatever you believe is true for you, and that truth is the same as belief. The correspondence theory says that truth is that which corresponds with reality or the way the world is, and that in the absence of evidence, you should just be skeptical. And I think that there's this sort of idea that if you can't tell if there's not enough evidence, then whatever you believe is valid. But that doesn't seem like it would follow, though. Like, just it seems like if there's no evidence, that what we should do is withhold belief, right? I don't know. If I think about something I might tell you that there's no evidence for. If I tell you, hey, I heard like that putting like bologna in your shoes will increase your absorption of vitamin D, which is very important in this northern climate where we don't get much sunlight, right? And you'd say, well, that's an interesting view. Would you just go out and do it? Would you just go in there, buy a package of bologna and with a pair of scissors, cut out little bologna insoles and slide them into your shoe, walk around, squish, squish, squish? You probably like check it out, right? You have the internet and you think, oh, Borrowdale's probably putting me on. That doesn't really fit in with what I learned in health class, and that seems kind of crazy. I heard bologna's bad for me. It's got a bunch of nitrates in it. I'm not sure how that would work, right? It seems like you should be skeptical about that because I haven't provided any evidence. If I said, well, just believe me, right? You'd say, well, why should I believe you? Trust me on this, right? It seems like, now would you say, oh, that it's true for me that bologna insoles increase the absorption of my vitamin D? You'd say, well, no, I'd like to see, is there some evidence for this? Is there a study? Do you have, maybe you can show me like, you did this and you can show me the before and after blood work. And then you'd want to know, like, what else was I doing? Oh yeah, I was also taking these vitamin D capsules, but they work better if you use the bologna insoles, right? So, and then you move back to the objective world. Now, the problem with things like ethics and religion is that the evidence seems very difficult. But that doesn't mean that you should switch theories just because, I don't know what, why would you change your definition of truth when you came up with a case where there's ambiguous evidence? And maybe this is confusing, maybe you're confusing truth with justification. So you can believe something's true without necessarily having any justification, which means like evidence or reasons why it's true. So I could have a belief that just happens to be true by accident, right? So if I said, like, I correctly predicted that President Trump would win the White House, in the fall of 2016, which is true, right? And you asked me, like, well, how did you figure that out? And I said, well, my lucky bicentennial half dollar with John F. Kennedy on the front there, 1976. And I flipped it, and I said, heads, Trump wins, and tails, he loses, and it came up heads. So now it turned out that my belief was true, right? So, but the reason that I had, if it was just flipping a coin, that's just random. That would have no, that's not good justification. So you can have truth without justification. You can also have justification without truth, right? You can have really good reasons and evidence for something and just turn out to be wrong. Anybody ever have this happen to you where you have like all these reasons why something looked really good, and then it turned out it was just, it really looked like this one thing was true, and it turned out that it wasn't. I don't know if anybody think of a particular case. I can think of a bad like business deal I was involved in that had all sorts of credibility indicators, and millions of dollars invested into it, and it turned out it was a bad investment. Sometimes people are really good at pulling the wool over people's eyes, and sometimes people just like circumstances are such they make something look like it's true when it's not. You might say it's a case of like the Aborigine, right? So the Aborigine believes the world's he's surrounded by gods and spirits, that things that are caused by disease and caused by malfunctions of the central nervous system he thinks they're actually caused by evil spirits, right? You have this tribe called the Yanomamo. They're down in Brazil, and they're in perpetual warfare with the other tribes. There's a group of tribes there, and so every time somebody gets sick, their theory is that, well, the shaman for the enemy tribe must have put a hex on him, so let's go out and kill those guys. Screw those guys, we're going to kill them. And so you have perpetual warfare because they're in a tropical climate. People get sick all the time. There's all sorts of tropical diseases there. Every time somebody gets sick, they think it's like bad juju from the enemy shaman, and they go and fight those guys. But you might say, well, if that's your society and you're inculcated into that, maybe can't be blamed for that. So you can have truth without justification, which is reasons, evidence why something is true. And you can also have justification without truth. And this is the one that's a little more rare, right? It's more. Seems like more often you have a true statement that which lacks justification. You just sort of be true by accident. You can also have if you have lots of good reasons for something and lots of evidence, generally it seems to produce true beliefs. But there are always cases where you end up being wrong because nobody's perfect. People make mistakes. There was a case, it was a case near and dear to my heart. There was a famous case of this guy who was he was accused of sexual assault. There was a bunch of rapes being committed in this community, and there are multiple eyewitnesses that say he's the guy that did it. That one of the women like scratched his face, and he had these scratches on that same side of his face. They did a blood test. They didn't have DNA at the time, but they did a blood test, and it turned out that the blood test matched this guy, and he was going to go up the river. Well, it turned out that he was a twin separated at birth, and his twin brother just randomly came into the town and started committing these crimes, and was like, it looked exactly like the guy, and the scratch on his face was like from a cat. And you imagine that you're accused of rape, and you have and the victim says that they raked their attacker with their fingernails, and you got the scratch on the side of your head. What are the chances of that happening? Yeah. And they identify you. And what are the chances that your twin brother, that you didn't even know existed, somehow randomly wandered into town and started committing crimes?
Your town.
Yeah, this is like really unlikely. But sometimes sometimes stuff like that happens, right? So as a juror, you may be, it seems like the rational thing to do would be vote for conviction in the face of all the evidence, but you would have sent a guilty man to prison. So, but it's possible to have all the reasons of the world, all the evidence of the world, and it turn out that you're missing some crucial piece of information, that there's some alternative explanation which looks absurd at the time. Nobody in the jury box or in the jury room, like they're trying to figure things out, would say, well, maybe this guy has a twin brother. They were twins separated at birth. He just randomly wandered into town. So then the question is, what happens when you get truth and justification? So truth, meaning corresponds with reality. Let's just assume that for a moment. It's a common correspondence theory of truth. So truth and justification together make knowledge. So that means that if a belief is true, that means that it corresponds with reality. And then if you have justification, you have good reasons for believing it, you have evidence, and you have sufficient evidence that prove the belief. then you have knowledge. So, and what goes on, I think, is that people tend to confuse these concepts, and they're easy to get confused. So, because how do you know something's true? Well, you got to prove it, right? But the proof and the thing being true are different. You use evidence to prove something is true, but that's different than the fact that it's true. The fact that it's true is that it corresponds with reality. How do you tell it corresponds with reality? You look for evidence. You look for justification. What happens when you have a true belief with justification? Then you have knowledge. Questions or comments? Should we come back to let's come back to the relativism thing for a second, unless somebody has something. I just asked the question about relativism. If relativism is true, if belief is subjective, and it's a subjective, if truth is a subjective mental state, and it varies from person to person or society to society, how could anyone ever have a false belief? And what does the word false mean, if that's the case? So if relativism, you see, if relativism is true, what does that even mean, right? Is the correct theory of truth? How would you ever have a false belief? And then there's this further question of what would the word false even mean? I mean, we use the word false, it seems to make sense.
False would probably just mean in a relative mind, it would mean a different reality. But for relativism to work, there would have to be different realities that exist.
And also, when you defined relativism, you said either it's relative to the individual or the culture.
Uh-huh.
And if we're going with if it's relative to the culture, there could be false beliefs within a culture. But if it's relative to the individual, then, I mean, false wouldn't really work.
Yeah, so you could have like true and false, and true that would just be determined by majority belief. But then, like, would it depend? Like, would you care like why the majority believes what they believe? I suppose might be one question. Like, is it just whatever people happen to believe? Everybody around you believes say Galileo, right? Galileo's got his first telescope, and he's looking through that, and comes to the conclusion that the sun is not the center of the universe, that the earth revolves around it. The church says, no, that's not true. And they get into this fight, and basically Galileo's threatened with being tortured by the Inquisition and perhaps even killed, and so he recants, right? But it seems like you would say, even though the majority of the people at the time believed the earth was the center, the earth was the center of the universe, not the sun. Galileo was correct. He had a true belief. Everybody else was wrong, just wrong. Sometimes can't the majority sometimes be wrong?
Ad populum fallacy.
Yeah, there's a fallacy called the ad populum fallacy.
Oh my God, I actually got it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's from critical thinking. Yeah, so the majority, the bandwagon fallacy, just because everybody believes something's true doesn't make it true. So I suppose you could have, in a way, you'd have a false belief, but then the question is, would that belief really be false, or are they just going against the majority?
I feel like if it's relativism, the belief would only be false if the individual rejects it within themselves.
Yeah, why would you ever change your mind is another question, right? Usually people change their mind when they think they've made a mistake, when they get some new evidence, right? Why would you ever change your mind if your beliefs are already true? They're true for you. So, and now under the correspondence theory, okay, so I want my beliefs to to correspond with reality. And so when I notice that reality seems to differ from my beliefs, I don't think I can change reality. I try to change my beliefs to fit reality. I don't just hold on to them, right? Like if you have, think about like your beliefs as like a map, like a road map. So if my road map, like I went to Vegas one time and I was using this, using the GPS, and the GPS hadn't been updated, and they're doing construction on this casino, and I followed this road that led to nowhere. There's like a bunch of dirt and like a, you know, like a construction like dead end, right? And there's no way I could get to the casino hotel where I was staying. I didn't say, well, this map's got to be right, so I'm just going to keep on driving and drive through the construction barriers and over the dirt and wreck my car, right? I said, well, this map must be outdated, right? And I discovered I had a false belief about how I should get there. I called the hotel, and they told me, oh yeah, go this way to get around to it. So it seems like I changed my belief because I found out that it's outdated, or it's the thing that the world has changed. Or sometimes I just find out that the evidence would seem to point in one direction was actually misleading, and that the truth lied in another direction. So then what's a relative? And let me make another point about the relativist. So is relative, the theory of relativism itself, is the theory of relativism the true theory of truth? When you say it's a correct theory, what does that mean? I mean, it just means it's true. Is relativism true?
Is the truth inside you, can it change? And would that make it true if it changes within yourself without correspondence to reality? Regardless of what reality says, if it just changes, if you have a change within you.
Yeah, so your beliefs could change, and then why would you ever change your beliefs though? They're already true. Why would you make an adjustment?
Is it that, I mean, your beliefs are based on the knowledge you have, and that's why you hold them to be true in general. So when you get more knowledge and you have to find a way to incorporate that into your beliefs, that would affect and change what you consider to be true.
Yeah, I'd
mean,
say
is that-
more,
that's-
yeah,
But where are you getting that data?
more evidence, right? You
And
get
knowledge.
more.
Yeah, but is
Right.
relativism
Be
saying that
justified.
you can't base any of what you believe to be true in reality? Because that's where, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
you kind of need both
Yeah.
of them together, because you can't, all of what we consider to be true, all of our knowledge comes from observations of reality.
Yeah.
And so there's no way to have any idea of what's true without basing some of it in reality.
Why would you base all of it on reality?
Well, there's no way for relativism to work without having some of the correspondence theory as well, because all of your knowledge comes from observations of reality.
That's why you don't need
Well, the relativism disagrees with that. So it seems like you're trying to meld these two theories together, but it seems like they don't go together, because one of them says that unless you can find some reason for saying, like, in some cases we should use the correspondence theory, in other cases you should use the relativist theory. But it's like, I don't know, it's like, suppose you're the creation or evolution. Well, every time I'm in anthropology class and I look at dinosaur bones, I'm an evolutionist. But then when I'm in church, I'm a creationist. And I just switch back and forth. So like when I'm in church, I'm reading the book of Genesis, I switch to creationism. But that just seems irrational, right? It seems like those are incompatible theories.
So where are the beliefs coming from in relativism then?
Well, I think from these other things here, like, I mean, you mean like what, not what motivates it, but what, like where do you get your beliefs?
Yeah. Because
That might be another problem with relativism.
Yeah,
It
where
seems
is
like,
that self?
okay,
Where
you
is the
have
self?
experiences, right?
mm-hmm.
So you have experiences, and how are things seen to you? So this is the thing, like that relativism says, relativism makes this claim, that appearance and reality are the same thing. You have experiences, and whatever you experience is true for you. If the room feels hot to you, you'd say the room is hot to me. the room feels cold to you, say the room is cold to me. And the idea is there's no truth independent of people's individual perceptions.
So then, as you experience more things, that would mean that that could change your beliefs.
I suppose I have some new experiences, but then why would I say, if I have a new experience, why would I reject my belief about the old experience? You say they're contradictory, right? But this whole idea that a contradiction can't be true, what is that? Why would I think that if it's whatever things seem to me?
Not just relative to the individual or society, it's relative in terms of time as well. As at this moment in time, this is true to me, and then maybe in 10 minutes, at that moment in time, something else will be true to me?
Yeah, like whatever I feel at the moment, I suppose.
So you are constantly evolving your own truths within yourself with this theory.
Yeah, I guess I generate my own truths.
Evolving. There are people who you can't convince to change their mind at all, no matter how much evidence you show them.
Well,
That's true too. I mean, some people, they just hold their beliefs no matter what. Yeah, so I mean, so you could do either way, right? But the idea is whatever you believe at the time is true for you. And why would anybody think that? Well, they deny this distinction between appearance and reality. Now, I'd say like a normal person whose mind hasn't been ruined by, like, say, government schools would say, well, there's like appearance, which is the way things seem to me, and then there's reality, which is like the objective world. And sometimes those two things go together, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes my beliefs are true. Sometimes I get a rude awakening, and I found out my beliefs were false. I don't still hold on to those the false beliefs. I change my beliefs to accord with reality.
So then it's no longer relative.
Well, it seems like the theory of relativism is like it's contradictory. Well, first of all, this was part of trying to explain it, but this question about is relativism true? Is it the true theory? You think about this, well, what does it mean? Either you say, like, relativism presents itself as a theory of truth, but if you ask about this claim that relativism is true, is that true absolutely? If that's the case, then the correspondence theory is true.
Well, that would be truth without justification.
Well, I think it is a justified claim. I mean, the relativists might present reasons, but why would they?
Yeah.
So, but let's just think of this, leave justification aside for a minute. So if you ask the question, okay, so you've just expounded this relativist theory of truth, and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, this is an interesting theory. Is it true? And if you say, yes, this is the correct theory of truth, then you should embrace it because it explains all the different aspects of knowledge and truth and justification. This is the best theory of truth. So it's true. Yes. Okay. Well, is it true in general? Like, absolutely, is it true? Yes, this is a correct theory of truth. But then if you say that, there's at least one truth that isn't relative, right? Namely, the fact that relativism is true. So it seems like if you claim that relativism is a correct theory of truth, you've refuted relativism. On the other hand, suppose you just say, well, it's not true absolutely, it's just relatively true. Well, then that's just, you're just like describing the contents of your mind, but you're not really talking about the world, you're talking about you. I'm like, well, that's an interesting fact of your personal biography, but why should I care? Right?
So would you say that two individuals have a different reality?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I think that's,
So everyone lives the same reality?
Yeah, like we're in the same room here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing you talk, you're hearing me
feels
talk.
differently in the same room?
Well, like for temperature, right? So you might, I see you're wearing a jacket,
Mhm.
right? So you might feel cold. I'm just wearing a t-shirt, so I might feel warm, and maybe I feel it's just right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's an objective fact about the temperature in the room, and we have different subjective makeups. Maybe we got more insulation. Maybe because I'm a man, my metabolism's a little bigger, and I run hotter. So and those are also facts about the objective world, like about our subjective makeup. So we have different experiences, and that's true too. But there's also the objective fact of the absolute temperature in the room that can be measured.
Is this? the
Yeah.
same thing for
Yeah. So we can have different perceptions of the same objective reality. But it's not like we have different realities, like there's the hot reality and the cold reality. Those are just like subjective sensations which are indicative of some objective truth. So if you ask, is relativism true? If you say yes, then that's a contradiction. Because then you've embraced the correspondence theory of truth. If you claim that relativism is true, then truth isn't relative anymore. In other words, if you claim relativism is true for everyone, then that's contradictory because the theory says that truth is different for each person. If you say no, then this is just, it's not really a theory, right? It's just sort of, I would say it's your personal biography. Maybe it's this, like, this is about your mind, not reality. I'm running out of room here. You're telling me about what's inside your head, what your belief is, but you're not really telling me anything about the world or about reality. Now let's get to reality. So reality is just say what exists, what is, the objective world. And that's what truth describes. We can have subjective sensations and we can have beliefs about that world, but it's one determinate thing. And so, like in the room here, there might be things that it would be hard from your a person's perspective or based on their perceptions to know. For example, what's in my bottle here? Like, I know what's in my bottle. You might have some guesses about whether it's, whiskey, Jack Daniels, energy drink. I can taste what's in there, and maybe like even in your front row, you might be able to smell what's in here, depending on what's in here. But this is something that I know that you don't. But there's some truth about what's in my bottle here, right? Now, it just so happens from my perspective, I know what's in there. From your perspective, you don't. But there's some objective truth. Now, if you had a belief about what's in here, and you think maybe you think there's coffee in here, and your belief could be false, right? So, but it's not as if where there's two different realities. There's your reality where there's coffee in here, and there's my reality where there's, say, energy drink in here. There's just one reality. And we could look, and I could, open up my thermos and bring it around. You could take a whiff or maybe even take a sip and see what's in here, right? That would be the objective fact.
But technically, if you think about it, everything could be true if you thought of it all on the fifth dimension where you would consider all realities that have existed. So there was a point in time where you did have coffee in there. So technically, they'd be right, just on a different timeline.
Well, if you index truth to time, right? Because the world's always changing. So there's certain facts about the world, when I came into this room, this was mostly full. Now it's mostly empty. So the level of liquid changes over time. But that doesn't mean that there's no objective world. It's just that when you're talking about what's true, truth is which corresponds with reality. Reality is always changing, and so the truth changes with it.
But truth changes at the same pace that time moves to us.
Yeah, time is sort of a special problem. Maybe we'll talk about that later on. It might come up. I think it comes up in arguments with the existence of God and some other things.
Didn't Schrodinger, cat in a box?
Schrodinger's cat, right. That's a good example, and that's actually a proof of the correspondence theory of truth. So there's this debate in physics where, as this gets kind of complicated, but basically there's you get these weird things in physics where they describe things as probabilities.
Superposition.
Yeah, so you get superposition, you get this idea that you describe things in terms of probability waves. And so, and it's a useful way of modeling things and explaining things. But there's this physicist named Schrodinger, and what he said is like, look, this doesn't make any sense. He actually got the example from, I think Einstein quoted him about this. He had a couple of examples, but the famous one is Schrodinger's cat. And this idea is that, okay, suppose you have a cat, and you put it in a box, and you have a radioactive element that is going to emit particles, just sort of randomly. And you set up so there's a 50% chance that it'll emit these particles, and the particles will detonate explosive, which will blow up which will kill the cat. Or no, sorry, not explosive. I'm mixing these two examples. There's actually an example of dynamite, but this is one was poison gas. So the radiation randomly triggers some poison gas that kills the cat. Okay, so you know there's a 50% chance the cat is alive or dead. Okay, before you open the box, what is the case about the cat?
It's both alive and dead at the same time.
Yeah, so this is what the physicist said. And what Schrodinger wrote was that that's crazy, and that intuitively, either the cat's alive or he's dead. He's not both alive and dead at the same time, or neither alive nor dead. Now, he's either alive or he's dead. You just can't tell which till you open the box, till you observe it. And so truth is independent of observation. And so that's what he was saying. Basically, don't take these scientific models and these mathematical probabilities too literally. That is just a metaphor, and that it's that the common sense and logic tell you that reality exists whether or not we observe it. So that's Schrodinger's basic point. I mean, does that seem intuitive? That either the cat is alive or it's dead. It can't be both alive and dead. If you were to look in the box, you would see which it is. That's just the same thing as saying like there's both coffee. There's coffee and whiskey and Jack Daniels and whatever else people imagine is in this bottle until we open it, and then when we open it, then we can observe what's in it. So that's ridiculous, right? There's something in here. We may not know what it is. You may not know. I know what's in here, but you might not know what's in here. It's just you don't know. You lack evidence. This is like a really, I think one of the most fundamental important distinctions in philosophy is this difference between subjective and objective. And this idea that there is an objective world, that we learn about the objective world through reason and through the evidence of the senses, and then we come up with complex theories about it based on the evidence. And people have different subjective perspectives, but those are only valid if they match up with the real world. And in cases where it's hard to tell, we should withhold judgment. And there might be some cases where people have different views and there's no agreement, but that doesn't mean that there's no fact of the matter. Other comments or questions about reality, truth, reality, correspondence theory, relativism?
What about how you feel about something? Like feelings, like passion or fear or love or hate or anything like that. If like, I really don't know where I'm going with this, but how someone feels about, say something really serious like sexual assault or something, and how one person feels that that's okay, but obviously to most other people that's so wrong. Would that be the same reality that they are living in?
So that's an interesting question. And this, I suppose, comes to feelings, and maybe it seems like there's overlap with ethics, which I think you're hitting. Like people, there's a question about like feelings, whether there's certain feelings that are appropriate and inappropriate, which I think really speaks to like the ethical questions of whether people do things. People do things that some people react with and say that's terrible, and other people say, I think that's just fine. And so the question about like, is ethics relative? In other words, if I think abortion is the illegitimate killing of a baby, and you think abortion is a woman's civil right to terminate pregnancy, then there's like those are different appraisals of the same determined act. Like we might have some disagreement. Maybe there might be some disagreements about like the facts, the empirical facts of abortion and what abortion is. But it seems like even if we agree on all the facts, all the medical facts, all the empirically observable facts, we still might have a different judgment. And one person might think that abortion is perhaps not a good act, but it's sometimes it's a justifiable act, and other people would say it's never justifiable or even under certain circumstances. Because people differ in ethical judgments, would you say that they're relative or subjective? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. I guess I'm just trying to make the distinguish relativism and the correspondence of reality within myself. I'm trying to figure out how those are different when reality is the same wherever you are.
Right. Listen, you get this with ethics in the same way you get this with religion. This idea that now there's a philosopher, David Hume, that says that all there is to ethics is just feelings, and so he would say that ethical judgments are really just a subjective reaction to certain stimuli. Some of them based on human nature, and some of it's based on experience and associations. So if I have certain positive or negative associations based on experiences I have, I might look on one action favorably, another one unfavorably. So everybody recoils at wanton murder, and virtually everybody. Maybe there's a few psychos out there. Something's wrong with their brain, but most people would recoil at, say, I know an elderly grandmother being bludgeoned with a baseball bat in the middle of the street. Most people would see that as bad, and they would recoil with horror. And he would say that people disapprove of murder, particularly murder of the innocent. And that's sort of rooted in human nature, and it's part of a survival mechanism. And today we might say it's part of our evolution as social beings. And that's pretty much universal. But it's still a subjective reaction, and there's no fact that it's objectively wrong to commit wanton murder, Hume would say.
So can you still have a subjective reaction to the correspondence of reality?
Well, I think there's a question about whether feelings are triggered by external circumstances, and people have different reactions based on their experiences. But the question is, are there certain feelings or say moral appraisals that are right and some are wrong? Like some people might say, well, there's more to morality than just these subjective feelings. That the feelings are actually an indicator of a greater moral reality. That the reason we recoil at acts of murder is because murder is wrong. There's more to the feelings are based on something. So when you do something that harms another person, you feel guilty. Morality isn't cashed out in terms of guilty feelings, that all there is the feelings. It's based on some external act that you performed. And it might be that some people feel guilty for irrational reasons and some people feel guilty for rational reasons. So say if you were raised by a repressive religious family and you get out of the shower and look at yourself in front of a mirror and you feel ashamed, right? So that might be because your parents are giving you all these messages about your body being dirty and sinful and so on. And that I would say was irrational, right? But it might be that you get back too much change at the supermarket and you walk over and you pocket the money, and you feel bad about it, right? But maybe you should feel bad about it. Or you lie to a friend in order to save face, right? And you feel guilty about that. So, and maybe you should feel guilty about that. So it seems like the correspondence theory could say there is an ethical reality, and that even though we have these feelings, that some of them are valid and some of them are invalid. Sometimes we feel guilty for irrational reasons that don't have anything to do with reality, but have to do with I don't know, like dysfunctional behavior, say. And maybe we've been convinced of things that aren't true because of our upbringing and inaccurate messages about ourselves our parents give us. And some of our feelings might be justified based on objective reality. And that's all we have time for today. So we'll jump right in and talk about Socrates and the apology on Thursday.